the law, politics, and where is America headed in 2017. I am honored, if not privileged, to have with me today Lew Grant, former president of the Cook County Bar Association, the Black Legal Association in Chicago, an outstanding criminal defense attorney, a young man that has been on the forefront for a number of years dealing with issues involving the law and the African American community, an outstanding defendant of the rights of the oppressed and the dispossessed. Lew Grant, lawyer extraordinary, welcome to Beyond the Gun.
Lew, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Lew, before we get started today, off of the set, you and I were talking about today the Police Accountability Task Force that just made a report about 2 months ago about racism and the Chicago Police Department. That task force was headed by Lori Lightfoot, a former assistant United States attorney, and a member of a task force, outstanding African-American lawyer, law professor, formerly head of the Cook County Public Defender's Office, was a participant on that panel, and was the leading force in the panel coming at some of the decisions that it made about racism and the Chicago Police Department. I want to start off today briefly. Give me your reflections about the Police Accountability Task Force. Give me your reflections about some of the findings that came out. And you mentioned to me about the Department of Justice report, which had come out saying that the Chicago Police Department had a history of and a pattern of abuse. And you wanted to say something about that before we got into Donald Trump and where do we go from here?
Well, Lew, what was troubling about the Department of Justice report came out, I believe, in early January. Their findings, which was nothing new to myself, certainly nothing new to the legal community in Chicago, or those of us who have spent years fighting issues of police brutality and criminal justice reform. But the Department of Justice finding that the Chicago Police Department engages in a pattern and practice of unlawful use of force against black residents. That was not new to us. We have been saying this to Chicago, and to be quite frankly with you, Lew, black people, regardless of where they are in the nation, whether they're in Chicago or New York or California or St. Louis or Baltimore, wherever we find ourselves in communities that are predominantly African American and we are being policed, we have made it clear that we are being misused and abused by the police departments, irrespective of where we are.
Let me hit you with several quick points. Do you believe that racism does exist and still exists within the Chicago Police Department?
Do I believe racism exists?
Yeah.
Racism absolutely exists. I mean, does it exist? Unfortunately, it's at the bedrock of the Chicago Police Department. And it's at the bedrock primarily because most of the people who police our community are not from our community. And they don't have an understanding of how to police our community. Our community is underprotected and over-policed. We are the victims of crime, but we are not protected by the police.
I think the public wants to hear, given your outstanding leadership background in this area, both as a lawyer and somebody who grew up here in Chicago, grew up here in the projects of Chicago.
That's correct.
I think that they want to hear, if it's a problem, how do we cure it? I mean, it's not going to disappear.
Sure.
I agree with you that it's very much alive. And so in this part of our discussion, what do you see as, how do we cure the problem?
One of the ways we cure the problem, in my humble opinion, is first it starts with leadership. And I'm talking about leadership, political leadership. In the city of Chicago, it has to come from, first and foremost, the mayor's office. You need leadership in the city of Chicago and all of these major cities that is committed to criminal justice reform, that is committed to reform in the police department, who will not tolerate police officers unlawfully and unconstitutionally shooting and killing black people.
You think Mayor Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of the city of Chicago, this is your opinion,
Sure.
has the commitment and fortitude and perseverance to address this problem with a view toward cleaning it up?
Absolutely not. Mayor Rahm Emanuel was part of the problem, part of the cover-up to hide the shooting of Maquan McDonald. I mean, the 16-year-old kid who was shot and killed 16 times, allegedly about to attack the police, which the videotapes showed that didn't happen. If it wasn't for a court order that ordered the city to make these tapes public, we would have never saw that.
How do we hold, Andre, and we got to move off of this subject, how do we hold the police accountable? This was a police accountability task force. Professor Stone, those of you who have not read the report, please, we're going to be showing him on CAN TV and that interview. And he had some very interesting remarks about how they arrived at that decision of saying that the police department was, in fact, had a racism problem. What can the police department do? How can we hold them accountable?
There are a number of things they can do. There are tons of things you can do. One, as I said, it begins with the leadership in the mayor's office, wherever that is. Two, you must increase the number of African American police officers. In Chicago, cities around the country, black people should be part of the leadership and patrolling these particular communities. Three, those good officers, we always talk about, well, there's some good officers. We understand that there's good officers. That's not the problem. But those good officers won't speak up. Those good officers won't turn in bad officers. Those good officers support bad officers even when they know the officer is lying on tape, not lying on tape, or lying on tape, or lying in his reports. We need to prosecute officers who violate the law, not give them a pass. They have to be prosecuted.
Citizens and lawyers and black professionals who are listening to this, I mean, what can they do?
They can do exactly what we're saying. They have to speak up and speak out. Whether you're a black lawyer or white lawyers, there's some white lawyers that are doing exceptional jobs in defending black litigants, people who have been shot and killed, and suing the police department. We need to, prosecutors, we need to hold the police accountable when they unlawfully take lives. That's the first and foremost thing we have to do.
Okay, let me ask the final question. Let me kind of go back again. What role does the African American community, the citizens, both middle class, lower income, you name it, however you want to characterize it, because what we know is that the racism in the police department does not deal with classes of black folks.
Sure.
Black is the color for the day.
That's correct.
And at the end of the day, what is it that this community can do? How do they begin to organize? And what is it that they can do to bring pressure on the police department, pressure on the mayor? What effective tool would you recommend?
One of the things that we often say that life is cyclical. We've been here before. We were here in 1968 and 1969 when the African American Patrolman League was founded. And those black officers got together. And they got together around a theme, and that theme was we support the black community. And they made it clear that not only are we police officers, but we're also part of this community. So the African American community must organize, speak up, speak out. They must realize that the police work for us. They are not a separate entity. The police work for the people, and the police must serve and protect us, not see us as some type of a threat simply because of your color. We got to speak up and we have to speak out. Black elected officials, we have to address the issue of the crimes that are going on in the criminal justice system. We have to speak up to that. We have to organize, we have to vote, we have to protest, direct demonstration like our young people have been doing in Chicago, like they did in Baltimore, like they did in Ferguson. Unfortunately, change doesn't take place unless there's agitation.
Okay, viewers, I hope you have your pen. I'm now I'm a retired professor from Chicago State University, but those are good suggestions. I want to jump the gun. I want to go to why Beyond the Gun has you here today.
Okay.
And one of the things is the topic of discussion in the world is Donald Trump and beyond. Where do we go with him? Where have we been so far with him in the first 115 days or so of his administration? Let's go directly to the issue. Yesterday, his Attorney General, Sessions, and a former senator from Alabama, issued a statement that basically said, you know what? We want to cut back on the Obama administration's cutback on arresting nonviolent drug offenders, giving them some kind of breaks. We want to go back to the old ways of doing business. And many people took that to be encouraging the local fraternal order of police in different cities in the country, giving them the green light to go back to doing what they were doing. What's your view of Sessions? How does that affect African Americans, both incarcerated, on the streets? Give us your viewpoint on that.
Let's rewind a minute. Jeff Sessions, the new Attorney General, a Alabama Republican. Alabama, Alabama, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, Alabama. Jeff Sessions made it clear when he was appointed as the new Attorney General that, one, he did not believe in consent decrees. He did not believe that the federal government should be involved in investigating police departments, wherever they are, that's not the federal government's job. Now keep in mind, and we go back to this, the Chicago report that the Department of Justice did, after that report was done, they entered into a consent decree with the city of Chicago to monitor the Chicago Police Department to see if they could make some changes in the police department. One of the first acts of the Attorney General session was, we're not going to be involved in that. We're not doing that. In fact, yesterday, he had this big press conference with the SBA, which is the Sergeants Benevolent Association of New York, which is anonymous in Chicago to the Fraternal Order of Police. They gave him an award. They made him an honorary member of the police department. And Jeff Sessions announced at that press conference that he is taking the handcuffs. That's what he called it. Those are his words. I'm taking handcuffs off the federal prosecutors, and I want them to vigorously prosecute, first of all, vigorously charge. I want more strict charges, and I want more strict sentencing and punishing for so-called drug offenders, and he specifically named cities.
Well, let me ask you this. He's the Attorney General of the United States of America.
Sure.
He has a legal responsibility to make sure that the laws are enforced. What is wrong with the Attorney General of the United States of America saying, I'm going to take the handcuffs off of the police and let them go back to enforcing the law?
Lew,
I mean, what's the problem with
Lew,
that?
you sound like a Republican.
I know.
Notwithstanding that, there's nothing wrong with it if the law is applied equitably. It does not apply to bankers who break the law. It simply doesn't apply. It doesn't. When we talk about the banking failure in America, nobody was prosecuted for that. Nobody went to jail for the billions of dollars in white crime that is being stolen. When they use this word about stricter charging of drug offenses, stricter charging of stricter sentencing, that's cold word. He's really talking about black people. He's talking about black and brown and Latino people. That's what he's talking about. When he identified those cities, he's talking about black and Latino people in those cities. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about law enforcement around the law enforcement around the entire country. We're not talking about whites who use powder cocaines or anything to that nature. We're talking about another war on drugs. We've seen this before, whether it's Republican or Democrat. We've seen it with the Clinton administration.
Is it your belief that your feelings about the new Attorney General under the new president, I mean, what he did yesterday and talking about taking the handcuffs off of the police, is it your viewpoint that somehow is going to be detrimental to the African American community?
Absolutely detrimental to African American, because it targets particularly young black youth. All it is another method of mass incarceration. It didn't work the first time with 3 strikes you're out. If your only solution to crime and drugs in our community, if the only solution is incarceration, you're not going to change it. It's not going to stop. Our kids need jobs. They selling drugs because they don't have jobs. They selling drugs because the poor education. That's the problem in the community. Unless you bring real resources other than lock them up will never solve the problem.
Okay, we're moving fast on this interview, because I have so many Trump-related issues, you know, to
Lock
ask
him
you,
up, right?
to ask you about. Number two, what about James Comey, the now former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who was abruptly fired 2 days ago by the President of the United States. And there's a big controversy about why he was fired. You know, there have been different statements made by the President as to why he fired him. There have been different statements made by representatives of the President about why he was supposed to have fired him.
Sure.
Where are we on the director of the FBI versus the President of the United States as a long-standing lawyer involved in the criminal justice system, particularly on the federal level? You know, what are your views about the Comey, what appears to be the Comey-Trump feud now, which has encapsulated the country, and it's the biggest discussion around the world?
Well, Lou, it's troubling. You know, there's no other way to say it. It's troubling. Here is a president who fired the head man who's investigating him. That's the first thing. Now, I don't want to give the perception that the FBI somehow have been friends to black people. Let me get that clear. Historically, the FBI, all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover, to the counterintelligence program, the FBI has been no friend to the black community. They have spied on all of our leaders. They have created an environment to undermine them, to vilify them, the whole work. So they have a long history of, for lack of a better term, disrespect and undermining legitimate black leadership and our desires to better ourselves and to strengthen our community. So that's the first thing. Notwithstanding that, James Comey made a lot of mistakes. Particularly,
what are some of the mistakes?
Well, one of the obvious mistakes.
Because you and I talked about this off camera, and I told you I thought that there may have been, for the lack of a better term, probable cause for him to be dismissed.
You thought he might have been right to fire him. He should have been fired.
You know, at the end of the day, you know, but I want to hear your views on it.
Well,
and so does the listening audience.
I agree with you. I agree with you that Comey made some major mistakes. One of the mistakes was his, for lack of a better word, interference with this election, you know, the election that just passed. For
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton, and the email scandal. That Comey he overstepped his boundaries by coming out publicly, making certain statements about Hillary Clinton, coming out a week or two before the election, before the actual vote, and saying, I'm reopening the election, then coming back a week or so later saying, I found nothing there. These were all not only uncharacteristic of an FBI director, but it may have directly influenced the outcome of that election. Everybody knows that. So,
well, at the end of the day, I mean, Donald Trump, at the time that he gave the first interview about Hillary Clinton and saying that he was not going to indict her, where he actually discussed things about, you know, how she handled the email server situation. Well, the issue is, and the public wants to know, and they want to know from you as a criminal law expert, shouldn't Donald Trump, if he would have had those concerns, fired him the day that he was inaugurated and officially became the President of the United States? Why didn't he do it then?
Well, he couldn't do it. One, he was praising Comey. He kept saying, look, this was wonderful, that the FBI director showed great strength and courage, and he should have been applauded. The only thing the FBI director didn't do was indict Hillary, and that's when they started chanting, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. So he was really applauding the FBI director and what the FBI director was doing. So the problem, Lou, what happens after that is that once Donald Trump became aware of this investigation, this Russian investigation.
That's the investigation that the FBI was conducting of the contacts between Trump, possibly Trump campaign people,
correct,
and members of the Russian, for the lack of a better term, members of the Russian community.
Correct. As that investigation began to accelerate, Trump began to have a problem with the FBI director. Now he claims, as recent as yesterday or the day before, he claims that the reason why he fired him was because of the recommendations from Sessions and the deputy attorney general. Now, Sessions wasn't supposed to be involved in any determination because he said he was going to remove himself from anything that had to do with Russia. Keep in mind, Sessions was also on the tapes speaking to some Russians when he said during the Senate investigation that he had never talked to any Russians, and he said no during the questioning.
Well,
he also said no on his application, and that he would remove himself from anything that had to do with Russia. But he ended up recommending that the head investigator or the head prosecutor who's investigating the Russian ties be removed.
As a lawyer, criminal defense lawyer, do you think in any way that could be
obstruction of justice?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, it's obstruction of
Why?
justice. Lou, imagine you being pulled over by the police. Police stop your car, and a police officer says to you, step out of the car, and you tell the police officer you're fired. You can't do that. You cannot fire the person. Let me rephrase that. He has the power to do it. If he was going to do it, he should have did it previously. But Donald Trump himself said, this is fake news. This is fake investigation. I want to get this over with. And that Comey is a grandstander and a showboat, and I wanted him out. You fire the man who's investigating your possible illegal conduct and collusion with the government, with the Russians. You can't do that.
Well, I think
that's almost a classic definition of obstruction of justice.
Well, I think what the public wants to know, based on your background and experience, that's why we're having this debate.
Sure.
Clearly, if you ask me, I think as the Chief Executive Officer of the United States, and from the way the FBI's statute reads about a 10-year appointment, Comey said himself that the FBI, the president can really fire an FBI director for almost any reason. If Trump had the authority to fire him, and if he fired him even for the reason that you just articulated, does that in any way really violate the law? If he had the power to do it, why couldn't he do it?
Of course it violates the law. He has the power to do it. He has the authority to do it. He does not have the legal right to do it if he did it with the purpose and the intention to thwart that investigation of him and his operatives and their cohesions or relations with the Russians. He cannot do it under that reasoning. For instance, let me give you one example. You may be an employer. You may have certain employees. Let's say in Illinois, we are an employee at will state. You can quit if you're an employee. You can quit for any reason, and I can basically fire you from any reason, except I can't fire you because of your race. I can't fire you because you're a woman. I can't fire you because you're a whistleblower. There's still some reasons I can't fire you. Likewise, the president can hire and fire the director of the FBI. He cannot do it in order to protect himself or to protect his underlings from a federal investigation. And it appears, even based on what he said, it appears that is exactly why he removed the FBI director.
All right, let's jump to another Trump issue. There have been a number of discussions about the possibility of bankruptcy fraud. Donald Trump, as a businessman,
Sure.
Over the past 10, 15 years or more, it is my recollection that he has filed at least 5 bankruptcies. And there are some allegations that during the course of filing those bankruptcy discharges or filing for bankruptcy, that some type of fraud may have been committed by him. Do you think that is worthy of investigation by the FBI?
I think that what is worthy of investigation? The answer is yes. And keep in mind, an investigation is an investigation. It may be nothing there, but the issue is, do we look into that? And I think the bankruptcies will go under what I will call the Trump financial dealings, his financial dealings with the Russians. Because there's a lot of information out there that he has major ties with the Russians, that he had financial dealings with the Russians. One of his sons have made the statements about their banking interests with the Russians.
Everybody wants to know this. because this is a big issue from this is long before Donald Trump became the president. Sure. What about the disclosure of his income tax? As of now, he has refused, not failed, but refused to disclose it, his income tax statements.
Sure.
And he says that from the past few years, he's been under audit, he's still under audit, and he is not going to reveal with the public what his income tax situation is. Does that pose a potential legal problem? And if so, how does that become a legal problem in terms of his taxes? Because the public doesn't know what's in there. It could be good, it could be bad.
It's definitely a problem in terms of the court of public opinion. When you're under a federal investigation, now, you know, and the language is going back and forth, well, Donald Trump is not under the investigation. They're investigating the campaign. But you and I both know under a federal investigation, that investigation can take you anywhere. You may have somebody who's a target. You may have a target. And in looking at this target, you may interview people. And some of the people or the witnesses that you interview go from being just witnesses to suspects. And you may be looking at a suspect under a federal investigation, and that suspect quickly goes from just being a suspect to a target. So likewise, as they begin to investigate Donald Trump and his dealings and looking at his financial situation from a legal standpoint, what happens is that the FBI, though Donald Trump, the president, doesn't want to disclose his tax returns, that the FBI subpoena his tax returns. And they, as a course of their investigation, begin to look at the tax return, look at the financial dealings, look at the bankruptcies, and that may lead from some innocent investigating to some suspicion to a possible federal indictment or what have you.
Well, let me ask you, let me wind down with this one. I mean, there's so much discussion, particularly with the Flynn situation, the former national security advisor. And now you got Donald Trump, as recently as yesterday, tweeting on his tweet, implying that if Comey, the now dismissed FBI director, he should be careful about what he says because his telephone conversations might have been recorded. Does that pose, as a criminal defense lawyer, as somebody who's worked in this area, does that imply, many people are saying, well, that's a threat. In fact, Senator Dick Durbin called it a threat. I mean, what's your viewpoint on that?
Lew, it's troubling. Again, it's troubling. One of the reasons it's troubling is because you can't, normally, that's a form of surveillance. Remember, the president accused the former president, Barack Obama, of wiretapping him, all right, secretly recording him. If what the president has suggested is true, that is that there may be tapes out there with his conversations with Comey without Comey's knowledge, then the president has secretly taped Comey, which is, in some circles, illegal. Well, you cannot, unless you have a court order to do that type of surveillance, you cannot secretly record somebody without their knowledge. And this is the president of the United States.
We have a minute left. And this is, I mean, we're just getting started. This has been an excellent discussion.
Invite me back.
I will. I will bring you back tomorrow, the next day, because I know people want to continue this discussion.
Okay.
Because the last thing that I wanted to ask you, and we got to go, let me tell you this. Many people think that he won't last 4 years, that he'll be indicted or impeached. I mean, give me your quick review. Do you think that he'll last 4 years?
Absolutely not. I don't know if he's going to last the end of the year. This may be treasonous. And keep in mind, Lew, we don't know what's on these tapes that the FBI and the CIA have revealed. We don't know what's on the tapes. We don't know what Michael Flynn was saying. We don't know what Sessions have said. This is still a secret. Donald Trump may not last through the year.
As a lawyer, do you have any anxieties about where the American Republic is going? And will it survive Donald Trump, or will Donald Trump survive what's coming at him?
At some point, we got to put the nation first. Not Republicans, not Democrats, the nation. And Donald Trump right now has put Russians ahead of his own nation.
It has been exciting. And I want to thank you so very much, because we're going to continue this discussion. And I think, a lot of the things that you've asked today, people want to know about. And that's why we're going to be having Beyond the Gun. We'll be giving these types of interviews, particularly with yourself in the days to come, to give the public, what your view is and give them some direction and guidance. And the next time you see me, I'm going to be even more aggressive about where we ought to be going and ought not be going. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.